Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you thought you were here for a congregational party. But tonight, Harold Boyce, this is your life. Could we have the lights out, please? I wonder, could we start off this evening? We have two chairs left out to the side here. Maybe if Mr. and Mrs. Boyce would like to join me on the stage, please. Mrs. Boyce as well. Would you like to join us on the stage? Watch the wire. Will you get me for this? I know Mr. Boyce isn't a vindictive man, so I'm going to continue with what I've got to say. Some of you may not know, but this year Harold Boyce celebrates 20 years as an ordained minister, and we thought this was a very fitting time to look back on Harold's career as a minister and to the days before he became a minister. And I'd like to start that now. We've done a lot of intensive research, and when we ran out of research, we used our imaginations, as I'm sure you'll realise when you hear what we have to say. Harold Walter Winston Boyce was born in Belfast on the 18th of October 1939, the apple of his mother's eye, and with a head of thick black hair. Harold was raised in the Craigie Road area of Belfast, a down-to-earth working class area whose good influences were to mould the young Harold into a good, level-headed young man with a love for racing pigeons and greyhounds. Euston Street Primary School saw Harold arrive at its door at the tender age of 4 during the very difficult war years. Despite the problems caused by the war, young Harold's creative talents sprouted during these formative years. While other children read Janet and John books, Harold sought greater stimulation as a child. He preferred Stott and Spurgeon Book 1. He shunned Enid Blyton and Nancy Drew, preferring to investigate the mysteries of Pilgrim's Progress and the works of A.W. Tozer. Harold always took an active part in his primary school's activities, but being a shy, sensitive child, he did not participate in the rough sports. Instead, joining the under-10 Reformed theological group. His leadership qualities shone through even at this early stage when he founded the P5 John Calvin Appreciation Society, which is now sadly no longer in existence. These childhood days were great times and well remembered by all the Boyce family, in particular by Harold's auntie Ethel Boyce, who moved to Australia over 20 years ago. But tonight, thanks to the generosity of Church House, we have flown Auntie Ethel all the way home, especially to be with us tonight. Come in, Auntie Ethel! Hello, Auntie Ethel.
Hello there.
Tell me, what memories do you have of Harold all those years ago?
Well, I tell you, I remember our wee Harold coming to our house every week in his wee short trousers and with his wee shiny head all polished. But you know what? He used to come and have tea with us, and I never understood a word he said. He used to use all these big long words. It was hopeless. And then he would tell you a story. And when he started telling you a story, did he tell you a story? 40 minutes later, and I was still there. But I can tell you, he was always the same. Always 3 structured points, nothing else.
Well, tell me, Auntie Ethel, really, what sort of child was Harold?
Well, he was really quite a wee shy boy. It's hard to believe, I know. He was quite shy and sensitive, and he couldn't always join in all the games that his friends played. You see, the The boys in his area used to like playing at barbers, and while they all took turns at cutting each other's hair, I don't know why, but our wee Harold just looked at them and couldn't join in.
Well, Auntie Ethel, thank you very much for coming all the way from Australia. A round of applause for Auntie Ethel, please, everybody. Thank you, Auntie Ethel. There's more.
You don't know how to use that.
Just get on with the sketch.
Harold! Harold! Harold, would you go to the bakery and get me some table farts, please?
Can you not wait an hour or two? I've got a couple more chapters of my fundamental principles of theology before
Well, all right. But make sure you remember to go, or there'll be no tea tonight.
Mummy, what does it mean when it says doctrine of election?
Well, that means that everyone votes, and the person with the most votes can do what they want because they're elected.
Mummy, what does predestination mean?
Well, it's like when you go on a big long bus journey and the driver stops so that everyone can go to the toilet before you get to where you're going. This is called a predestination stop because you haven't reached your destination.
Mummy, what's the difference between premillennialism and amillennialism?
Look, Harold, either go to the shop or read your book, but give my head peace!
Harold's educational career progressed at the Belfast Technical College, where he began to develop his extrovert nature, becoming very popular with his classmates at the Tech. It was also at this time that Harold began to develop that cultured manner, later to be cultivated by his beloved Eileen. He loved fine art and was himself an accomplished artist in his day, adorning numerous bagshed walls with such works as Harold Was Here, Harold Rules OK, and Glentoran FC. Harold was also a great follower of classical music. On many occasions he would have donned his zoot suit, crepe-soled shoes, and climbed on his moped, winging his way to Bangor seafront to join the hordes of other classical music fans. His mother assures us that he would have liked to have been a rocker, but he couldn't get his hair into a quiff. Yes, you've all heard of Cliff Richard, that great example of eternal youth. Well, Harold Boyce was one of Cliff's original fans. In fact, Harold's theme tune as a youth was Cliff's famous song, Bachelor Boy. However, as our story unfolds, we will discover how a young country lass named Eileen Patrick was soon to change this theme tune to You Are the Sunshine of My Life. In those days too, he excelled at many sporting activities. Like all great footballers, he struggled to find recognition in those early days, but he did reach the dizzy heights of reserve goalkeeper for the Belfast Tech Fourths. He held many records which still remain unequaled today. For example, no other goalkeeper in the history of Belfast Tech has ever conceded 14 goals in the first half of a match. Needless to say, he was substituted for the second half. His other sporting activities met with equal success, and his name is well remembered in the sporting history of the Tech. Harold's glittering career at Belfast Tech came to a sudden and abrupt end when he was chosen from thousands of eager applicants to take a top management position in Harlemouth Shipyard. We now have rare footage showing both the rigorous selection process Harold had to go through, as well as those first days as a cog in the wheels of British industry.
I'm here today from Harland and Wolff, from the drawing office, and I was wondering if any of you bright lads would fancy a career in a shipbuilding drawing office.
Well, mister, here today, can I ask a question, like?
Yes, son, what is it?
Well, you see in this drawer office, do you get homework like you do in tech?
No, it's a drawing office. And no, you don't get homework, it's from 8:30 to 4:30, that's it.
No homework, I will not be doing me, keep me in, no problem.
Well, that's what I like to see, somebody who gives their career lots of thought. Okay, son, you start on Monday morning, okay?
No problem,
Yeah,
mister,
on.
here today.
Our second scene in this sketch takes place in the drawing office at Harland and Wolff. They're very slow in the shipyard.
Well, my son, our other applicant just is a wee bit late. I think he's on his way. Just you have a seat there and we'll wait till he arrives, okay? What's your name again?
John.
John Parker. Here he is. Well, it's good to see you made it at last. Harold, Boyce, this is John Parker. John Parker, Harold, Boyce. Now, lads, this is your first day in one of the greatest drawing offices in Western Europe, you know. And here at Harland and Wolff, we design and build some of the finest ships you'll ever see in the world. And from today, you're part of that great team. Okay? Yeah, privileged, eh? So, what I want you to do is, it's not a very difficult task. Just design a wee ship there, okay? There's some paper for you. And I've got some pens in here. I think somewhere. Right, there you go, there's some pens. Now, just go ahead, nothing too complicated now. Nothing too complicated. Just see what you can do. Right, lads, let's see how you're doing. Let's have a look at yours, young boys. Dear. Well, boys, you'll never go far in this company, you know. Not like young Parker here, anyway.
Harold's career progressed well in Harland and Wolff. He was quick to learn and enthusiastic in all that he did. He worked on many great ships currently in dry dock being repaired. He became one of Harland and Wolff's top internal design engineers, where he was responsible for the design of some of the most important parts of the ship, critical elements such as the toilet bowls, broom cupboards, and wash hand basins. He won many internal awards for his drafting skills, prestigious awards such as Radiator of the Year, Door Handle of the Month, and the one that topped them all, yes, the Golden Cistern Award. Harold was a tremendous Christian witness to all those around him in work, leading the Spot Welders Bible Club at lunchtimes, as well as the Sheet Metal Workers Prayer and Praise meetings. It was at this time, as Harold worked hard, both in the shipyard and in his home congregation, Mount Pottinger, under the ministry of the Reverend Heaney, that he began to sense a greater calling. This calling was to take him away from his beloved drawing board and pens and into training for the Presbyterian ministry. As one reflects on those days Harold spent making his mark in the shipyard, one can only wonder what might have been had he stayed on and continued his glittering career in industry. In fact, one prominent East Belfast minister has been heard to say that if Harold had stayed in the shipyard, then John Parker would still be a T-boy. And I agree with you, Harold. Sure of his calling, Harold set off to McKay College in Londonderry to begin his extensive course of training. He started on a Bachelor of Arts course, which allowed him plenty of free time to pursue other extracurricular activities. One of these activities was, of course, the Christian Union. and as an indication of the respect in which Harold was held by his peers, he was given the post of Secretary of the Union. At that time, the president of the Christian Union was a certain John Dickson, who, as it happened, also shared a room with Harold. John often spoke of those days rooming with him and the tremendous help and encouragement he was. In fact, Harold even taught John how to play cards. It was at this time, in the romantic environment of a university campus, that Harold first met the beautiful Eileen. It was love at first sight. Poor Harold was smitten by the country lady, but had to compete with many other handsome suitors for her affections. But who better to tell us of this blossoming romance than Harold's roommate, who had to suffer his lovesick behaviour at close quarters? Yes, you thought he was back taking the midweek at First Antrim tonight, but we have flown him in especially for the show. Come in, Reverend John Dickson.
I'm not responsible at all for all of that. I did stick his lovesick behaviour. Harold was a very good friend to me, as has already been said. He taught me how to play cards. He also helped me to get onto the badminton club. He was the captain, and you should have seen him in his shorts when he was sitting there for the photograph with all the trophies on his knees. But I was only on really as fourth man when the second, third and fourth men who were usually there were injured. But to tell you something else, which really was the reason for my coming here tonight, Harold was a good friend of mine, and one day he came to me and he said, "You wouldn't ever bring me for a country drive because, you see, I like the country air." But it wasn't just any part of the country. He wanted to go down amidst the rolling hills of County Tyrone. And I had a car at the time. Now, it wasn't any old car. It wasn't a brilliant car, but it was a Ford, yes. And if you were going to make an impression in Cookstown, well, to arrive chauffeur-driven in a Ford car was an excellent start. And mind you, the two of us needed a start on that particular thing. We set off together, he with the smoke out of his ears and me with the grass behind mine, and we needed a predestination stop. But there didn't seem to be sufficient cover, and therefore the comfort wasn't as it should have been when we came up the Orator Road. But anyway, I think it was the excitement as far as Harold was concerned. So the house was rather posh, I tell you, that set us back a bit. And I got the car in through the piers and right up and parked. And then straightening ourselves, we pulled our shoulders back and approached the door with confidence. Well, I think it's true to say that Harold's fears were allayed when the delight of his life opened the door and with a warm embrace received him. And I was allowed in after. We were shown into the drawing room, and it was lovely too. Now, Harold had gained a lot of culture in the intervening days since he left the shipyard. And of course, I had been able to teach him a thing or two coming from the deep south. And we were there, and there was this beautiful music playing in the background. And he frowned his face, and looked at it with a very knowing, understanding look. And I think he had worked out that it wasn't the 42nd Boys Brigade Old Boys Band. And I certainly had worked out that it wasn't the York Girls Pipers. And he said, "Lovely music. What instrument is it?" And Eileen repeated, "Yehudi Menuhin." "Yehudi? Yeah," he said. "Really wonderful."
As they continued their studies, Eileen and Harold saw more and more of each other. Gradually, Eileen smoothed Harold's rough edges. She introduced him to the finer things in life, like classical music, art galleries, museums, and Ford cars. They enjoyed going out together. Eileen took Harold to see ballets and the Ulster Orchestra, while Harold took Eileen to Celtic Park to watch the Greyhounds. They had a wonderfully romantic relationship, but I suppose all good things have to come to an end. And in November 1968, yes, Harold and Eileen decided to get married. No. Eileen really had done well, marrying that handsome, dashing young, partially fair-haired minister. Perhaps spurred on by Eileen's success, her cousin Marlene also married a young minister, Ivan McKay, a good friend of Harold's. The two young couples with obvious common interests became close friends and shared many good times together. And yes, here to tell us about those experiences is Ivan McKay, flown in especially from Brookside, Huckle.
So it is just somebody dressed up.
I definitely won't embrace him. But I want you to know what you already know, and that is that of all his ministerial friends, I am the most serious. And therefore I thought I wouldn't engage in anything frivolous this evening. And I thought maybe, to begin with, I would teach you a chorus. Now I want you all to join in this chorus. All right? The first line of this chorus, like all modern choruses today, just repeats the words. Now the two expressions you repeat are, we rejoice, we rejoice. You've got that? Right? We rejoice, we rejoice. Not too bad for a start. Right, we'll have that again, but a wee bit more volume because I'm going to need your help here, all right? We rejoice, we rejoice. Fabulous, coming on great. Now, the second line of the chorus, well, it reflects a little of what we think of Harold. You know, when we're together, we're very sober. And we talk about dear Harold and dear brother. You know, and he just suits that title well, doesn't he? And then, of course, he's very insistent on titles. It's no Brother Harold or Mr. Boyce. It's Reverend Boyce. Okay? So this is the second line of the chorus. In 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. You got that? In 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. Right, we'll try that. From the start, we rejoice. We rejoice, we rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. Beautiful, beautiful. Right, that's the birthday greetings. Now, what I need your help for is this. And I don't know who's the bigger fool tonight, but I'm going to sing. And let me tell you, it's the first time in my life I have ever done this, and it's the last time. I wouldn't do this for any other human being. Right, we'll try the first verse, and as soon as I have finished the fourth line of the first verse, you come in, we rejoice, okay? Now listen to me while a tale I will tell of Harold, your pastor, you now know so well. 2 decades have passed since a proud ordinand, but still he is testing the patience of Strand. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching on dear Reverend Boyce. Fabulous. Right, we're going on to the second verse now. And remember, immediately at the end, we rejoice. He worked in the shipyard a few years or so. Then to Maggie College he wanted to go. The yard has now floundered, of work there bereft, and John Parker, he says it's because Harold left. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. When Eileen he took to Maggie Hockey, He soon realized he was on to a winner. His hair thick and wavy, and her waist so slim, it soon clarified that she had conquered him. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Edward Boyce. Sure. Now, what was
Stick where we are, dear. Right?
Now she was a Baptist and so was her dad, but still he approved of this elegant lad. There was only one problem, and it very sinister. He was planning to end up a Presbyterian minister. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. At assemblies he studied or gave that impression. More often with Eileen he had a wee session. He scraped Greek and Hebrew with help from above, though his expertise lay in the language of love. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. Now some people thought when to Durbach he went, that there all the rest of his life would be spent, but offending the farmers when viewing their sows, they chased him to Belfast 'cause he thought they were cows. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. As far as his health goes, he's really quite well. Though he's had a few problems, these secrets I tell. His nose and his veins have already had care. The next operation must deal with his hair. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. Some ministers find that their organist's gruff, and even quite often goes off in a huff, but not so in Strand where the music is bliss. For Harold maintains this with a regular kiss. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. One morning last autumn I called for a chat, and Harold confronted me on the doormat. Excuse us, he said, for the housework's not done. We're planning our holidays for 2000. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. They say when they went to the US of A, poor Erlingus had a most terrible day. They had to make contact with the boss of Rolls-Royce, lest the plane could not cope with the films of Boyce. We rejoice, in 20 years preaching of dear Reverend Boyce. My song is now ended, my poem is done. But for you folks in Strand it has hardly begun. You'll just have to stick him another few years, for who else
else would call him as retirement near. We rejoice in 20 years preaching of dear everyone.
Good. How do you follow that? After his assistantship in the Shankle Road mission, it was with a great sense of anticipation that Harold looked forward to his first congregation. With Eileen at his side, Harold was ready for anything, even a call to the country. As a boy coming from the Craiger Road, Harold had always thought that the country was somewhere like Glengormley or Dundonald. In fact, anything on the far side of the Knock dual carriageway. However, when the good people of Dervick spotted his great potential, Harold found out what the country really meant. He thought only missionaries had lions in their parish. Luckily, Eileen was able to give him some coaching, as she was a country girl herself. Being highly intelligent, Harold was soon able to tell the difference between a donkey and a horse. He even discovered that sheep grow wool on their backs, not fur. The greatest difficulty came when Harold tried to develop that thick Dervick accent. For the first 3 months, his congregation thought he had a bad head cold. But eventually he perfected the accent and was accepted into the rural community. In most foreign countries, expatriates tend to stick together. And up in North Antrim, Harold found another city slicker, Drew Moore, who was fresh from his assistantship in Strand. Drew and Harold often spent long evenings studying the local dialect together and reminiscing about the good old days in the city, where a man could walk up the road without fear of walking in cowpats. And tonight, yes, we are delighted to have with us to share a few more of those country experiences, all the way from Lurgan, Mr. Drew Moore.
I will keep it short, yeah. When I went to North Antrim, you see, I wasn't married, and I was very dependent on the Boyce family. And we would spend many times together. But Harold was the master of understatement. I had my meals at least 2 or 3 times a week in the Boyce house. And Eileen's not a bad cook, contrary to some opinions about the place. She cooks very well. But after a thoroughly good meal, Harold would look at me and he'd say, "I've tasted worse many's a time." Well, in those days, we used to have maybe a little more time than we have nowadays, and on Monday mornings we would always, as often as possible, go into Coleraine, and we would scour the streets of Coleraine, looking in the famous Mizpah Bible bookshop, the APCK, and 1 or 2 other places, and then finding our way into a coffee shop. And as sitting drinking coffee on a Monday morning when everybody else was working, Harold would lift his cup and he would say, "Ah, boys, it's great to be a Presbyterian minister." And then one of our brethren in the ministry, he got bright ideas about security in Northern Ireland. And he thought it was a great thing to be security conscious, and that ministers should be setting a real example in this business of security. And so he decided he would join the reserve police. And I was at the group one day, and I thought this was a great idea too. And I thought, here's Boyce and myself up the country, and we get through our work pretty well, and we haven't that much to do. So I thought to myself, now I must go over and I must say to Boyce, "Be a good idea, Boyce, if you and I thought about joining the reserve police and lending a bit of a hand at this point in time." So I went over with my speech all prepared, and I said to him, "Harold, Alistair's in the police, and I think he's doing a good job." I said, "What about you and I joining the reserve police?" "As is, Harold, I would, but there's far too much trouble in the country at the present time."
The lure of the bright lights was too much for Harold, and after a few years of that clean country air, he was ready for the smog of his beloved Belfast. And where better to continue his ministry than Strand, just up the road from his mother and round the corner from the Oval. Harold enjoyed being back in the city. He didn't have to drive 4 miles every morning to get his copy of The Independent. He had people and not sheep for neighbours, but most of all, the nightlife. Friends who didn't go to bed at 9:30. Yes, farming communities do have their drawbacks. Eileen too enjoyed being in the city, even if she found it difficult to understand the broad East Belfast accent, punctuated with that awful slang. She was, however, close to the things she loved most in life: the Grand Opera House, the Ulster Museum, and Marks and Spencer's. A feature of Harold's ministry here in Strand has always been sacrifice, and there is no greater example of this than his yearly pilgrimage to Leicester. Each spring he reluctantly packs his suitcase, bids farewell to his beloved Eileen, beautiful daughter Judith, and the 2 lodgers, Peter and Andrew, and sets off for that terribly drab ministers' conference. Anyone who has ever spoken to Harold about this will realise just how much of a sacrifice that really is. They will have heard of his homesickness and pining for his family, who he phones every hour on the hour. Tonight we have someone with us who can give us just a little more insight into his hardship. The Reverend Alistair Dunlop from Knock has accompanied Harold to Leicester on a number of occasions. And yes, Bob Allaley's taking the midweek tonight in Knock, and we have the Reverend Alistair Dunlop. Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to kiss you either. The Leicester Ministers' Conference is a very serious event. And Harold has been leading a group of very serious-minded ministers to Leicester for a considerable number of years now. We look forward with prayerful anticipation to this conference every year, but none more so than when we had a particularly important and special speaker. It was the year when there was a speaker from Ireland, a year when there was a speaker from the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, alongside Al Martin, alongside MacLeod, alongside all the men that we have revered over these many, many years. And this man whom we waited in awe upon from our own church was the Reverend Harold Boyce. Now, I want to explain something to you about Leicester. Whenever those who are there hear something of great, profound spiritual help, there is a great moan that ascends from everybody there. It goes something like this. It's a charismatic moan. Harold ascended the pulpit in Leicester, and all his Irish friends and friends from all across the world were there. And as he stood to speak, before even a word was uttered, such was the impact of this man that from right across the whole auditorium there came a There was only one problem about that year with Harold as speaker. It meant that he had to sleep in the block where the speakers slept, a specially reserved, set-aside block. And they all went to the early morning prayer meeting. Harold has never been to the early morning prayer meeting. But that year, he had to go to the early morning prayer meeting. He had to be there for 7:45 in the morning. But the most serious side of the Leicester Conference is not in Leicester at all. The most serious side of the Leicester Conference is in London. And Harold leads this serious group of Presbyterian ministers not only to Leicester, but to London. And there he tips every taxi driver in sight, and he takes us on a grand tour. The Natural History Museum, the Barbican, the Tower of London, Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, everything that doesn't move, Harold takes us to see it. But one year is particularly noteworthy. It was the year before his veins were done. And he had an awful lot of trouble. He went lame that year, and he couldn't walk, and he was in such misery. And London really has never been the same again to Harold. Harold Boyce, on behalf of all your more spiritually minded friends, we would like to say it has been wonderful to know you. And long may you be spared to speak and to lead us to London and to Leicester.
Being a minister in a big city church is never easy, with numerous services and meetings to take, as well as hundreds of families to visit. Thankfully, Church House, in their infinite wisdom, see fit to send Harold as an assistant from time to time. One of the more recent was the son of a minister Harold was once assistant to. When Harold heard that Howard Lewis was coming to Strand, he was delighted, and they developed a very good working relationship. Harold and Howard have been compared with many famous duos, such as Morecambe and Wise, Laurel and Hardy, and even the two Ronnies. Over the years, many rumours have spread among the students at Union Theological College about what it's like to work with Harold Boyce. Some talk of a strict regime. Others talk of a 3-line whip. We in the congregation know him as good, old, amiable Harold. But tonight, we have Howard Lewis with us to tell us the inside story of what it's really like to be his assistant. Howard Lewis.
I was delighted when I received the invitation to come tonight. It was a few weeks ago, and I thought initially that I would take some time and talk about the benefits that I've derived from having been assistant to the Reverend Harold Boyce. But then at the weekend, I received a telephone call from Ian to tell me that the time that I'd been allocated tonight was 4 minutes. There's no way I could fill 4 minutes talking about the benefits. So instead, I'm not just going to talk about the benefits, but some of the disadvantages as well. Now, we've already heard from a previous speaker that Harold is a man of culture, in his own mind at least. And so I thought I would introduce a little bit of culture in the closing moments of this evening, just to make the man feel at home. And I've penned 1 or 2 lines of verse. I've entitled it, Playing Second Fiddle to a Big Noise. The thing I most remember from my time with Harold Boyce is the way that for my holidays he left me with no choice. For he'd marked off for himself in his diary every year 2 weeks in July and some in August too, I fear. September was too busy for me to be away, with the meetings all beginning to get back into full sway. So October was the month when he'd say, forget it all, away and have a break in Paddy's Field in Donegal. Drink and driving are 2 subjects on our TVs every day, and 2 things in which he trained me in his own peculiar way. The drink refers to coffee. He could never get enough, and he used to warn, be careful, don't go long without the stuff. When we met to talk things over, the subject would come up and he'd say, just do 1 visit, then go home and get a cup. And driving. Well, he said I could do worse than to follow his example. But I'd like to quote a verse. For he's always driven biblically, as I'm sure you will agree when I've read these words out to you from 2 Kings 9, verse 20. The driving's that of Jehu, son of Nimshi, says the verse. He driveth like a madman. End of quote. And he's far worse. But the thing for which he's famous is his preaching of the word. And as boss, he once passed on the best advice I've ever heard. If you want an evening congregation that's so large it makes you smile, preach so long during the morning that going home's not worth their while. And frequently he taught me some words and phrases I should bring as encouragements in sermons, but which in fact don't mean a thing. Words like finally, and lastly, and in closing are a few that raise people's expectations but keep their bottoms on the pew. On the things I've learned from Harold, I could happily expand, and I'm grateful for the years I spent assisting him in Strand. When the folks across in Beaver scream, "You're a useless so-and-so," I just say serenely to them, "See Harold Boyce. He taught me all I know."
His 20 years in the ministry have left Harold with a few peculiar habits. One wouldn't want to suggest senility has set in, but to those of us in the congregation who know and love him, do find it a touch distressing. Harold and Eileen's eating habits have become unusual in recent years. Soup seems to feature regularly on their daily menu. Of course, Eileen tries her best, but her timing can be a little off. So much so that tea time can vary dramatically between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and midnight. But then you know the old saying, a good bowl of soup is worth waiting for. 20 years of marriage brings about many changes. Waistlines grow, hair thins, and memory fades. Harold has experienced his fair share of these changes. His waistline has grown, despite numerous diets, about 37 to date. His hair is thinned, if that were possible. And in recent months, we have seen his memory beginning to fade. Eileen, being a very supportive wife, has rallied round him in these difficult days, helping him when possible. A great secret recording of a recent meeting in the church illustrates this point very well.
Welcome along, everyone, to our midweek meeting. Tonight we hope to study.
No, dear, it's Saturday night. It's the prayer meeting, you know.
Oh, so you're right. So you are, you're right. Before our first time of prayer, we're going to sing from Mission Praise number 1, the Blue Books, hymn number 137.
No, dear, I'm sorry. It's hymn number 148 in Mission Praise 2, the Yellow Book.
Are you sure?
Yes, of course.
Oh, yes, you're right. Sorry about that, everyone. Let us all sing. I give you all the honor.
Harold, you're singing the wrong tune.
The wrong tune? What are you talking about? You sure you're playing the right tune?
Look, I've got the music here. It's the right tune, okay?
Sorry about this, everyone. She's from the country, you know. Excuse us while we have a family argument.
Of course, tonight's recollections would not be complete without a mention of his 3 wonderful children. The first to arrive on the scene was Peter, a beautiful, bouncing baby boy who has grown up into a fine young man, much in his father's likeness. He too has grown to love the finer things in life, such as quiet music and fine cuisine. And then there is Andrew. What could you say about him? Something his parents have been asking for years. But they love him and his Donald Duck impersonations, as do all who know him. Finally came the icing on the cake for Harold and Eileen, in the shape of Judith, a quiet, reserved child who could easily go unnoticed in the house were it not for her collection of 264 teddy bears, which currently occupy 2 bedrooms. The children are very close and enjoy nothing more than their haphazard family holidays when they take the caravan down through England, savouring the culture and heritage as they go. The boys often drag their parents into and around beautiful stately homes and castles, and more homes and more castles, enjoying the exquisite decor and artwork. Tonight, Harold thought his beloved offspring were at home, studying hard, but we have managed to prize them away from their textbooks to be with us tonight. And here they are, Peter, Andrew, and Judith.
Be emotional or something. I'm being emotional.
Well, it just remains for me to say tonight, Harold Boyce, this is your life.
On Sunday morning, just Mr. Boyce said that this wasn't going to be a serious evening, and you can see how wrong you were. It's been so very serious. But may I just be allowed for 1 minute to be very serious? We want to say to Harold and Eileen tonight a very sincere thank you for all that they do and have done in this congregation. And we'd like them to accept a very small token of what is a very big appreciation and thank you. So please, if this is here, you are Harold.
Here.
You take it.
The only thought that comes to me was that I, in all sincerity, asked the Lord tonight that things would go well in this meeting. I don't know if He's answered that prayer or not. I did wonder why so many people, well, not so many, but some people kept saying to me, will you be there tonight? And I had always every intention of being here tonight, but now I understand, and I forgive everybody. And Eileen and I thank you all from the bottom of our hearts. We're very grateful to you indeed. Thank you very much.
Can I just say, before we go in for supper, can I just say a very, very sincere thank you to our 5 visiting speakers tonight. Some of them have come a very long way and made sacrifices to be with us tonight, and they brought their wives as well to have a good laugh. So maybe we just thank Ivan McKay, Alistair Dunlop, Drew Moore, Howard Lewis, and John Dickson for coming along tonight. Thank you very much.
You knew all about this?